College football nerds are going to do a quick discussion about Washington and Oregon. It's a huge game in the Pac 12. We've done a ton of content this week, probably the most we've done this year, and we kind of ran out of time, but we still wanted to discuss this game and give it its due. We actually have watched a lot of Washington and Oregon this year, but unfortunately only have enough time to squeeze in a model-only discussion. So with that, I'm going to let Josh take it away and round out the video. Thanks, y'all.
So if you watched this before, you'll know that our model is a per-play model. We've done stuff with both Washington and Oregon, covered obviously Oregon, like the Auburn game, pretty big video for us. But we didn't have the chance to do a model in a lot of those games. So the model works by looking at your per play stats against your opponents, your opponent's per play stats, and your opponent's per play stats against everybody else. So we're looking at your performance relative to your competition, relative to your competition's performance against everyone else, purely relationally. So not whether or not you're good or bad, but whether or not you were good and bad relative to everybody, to the rest of the competition in college football, how you did versus your opponent averages, that kind of thing. We build a model off that kind of guesses at your production or gets a rough estimate of what your production is going to be in a given game. We factor in things like your tendencies in guessing that. It's not just, take the average of your run and your pass and you get your predicted yard per play. We're actually going to look at, what are your tendencies, what your run pass ratio is, stuff like that. And then based off that guesstimate on your production in the game, we then build a scoring model based off your past results. So every team's a little different in what it takes to score. Some teams score more points because they get special teams and turnovers. Some teams require a certain amount of yardage. We saw that with Georgia in their loss to South Carolina. Pro-style offenses tend to need like 8 yards per play to be able to generate high scoring production. You also see with spread offenses, if they fall below a certain mark, usually below 5 yards per play, they can shut down, whereas a pro-style offense can score 20 points with like 4 yards per play. So, we put all that together. We get the scoring model. The scoring model is unique to each team and your own tendencies. To the extent things like turnovers or special teams are predictable, then it starts to factor in. And then that's all, I should say, basically machine generated, what your scoring model is. And we generate a score from there. The goal of our model is not to be the be-all, end-all. I want to make that clear. The goal of our model is to give us an estimated B-plus baseline for what your two teams are. Most of the time, this baseline is pretty accurate or pretty steady, at least with Vegas. For example, we did the Arizona State-Utah game. Same model we do every week. We did it before the spread came out, and looked at it, and lo and behold, it was 13 points. I'll give you a slight clue. Not the case this week. It's a little off. So looking at all the different statistics for the two teams, the first intermediary statistic we generate is a percentage of opponent averages allowed. And what we mean by that is if your opponents are averaging 8 yards per carry, you allow 6, you're allowing 75% of their averages. It's interesting when you look at this statistic because I think everybody knows Oregon has a great defense. They're 88% of opponent running averages, which, by the way, this number from Penn State is in the 40s, and it commonly is in the 40-50% range in elite defenses. Oregon is not quite there. 88% is a good number, but not much more than good. I mean, they're elite in pass defense. 66% is crazy low. It is hard to get pass defense numbers that low. Actually, if anything, that might be a little bit of a red flag. And on the other side, Washington is at 117% of opponent rushing averages and 89% of opponent passing averages. 117% of opponent rushing averages is terrible. That is objectively bad by any measure. And it's easy to say they're only allowing 4.5 yards per carry, but their opponents only average 3.9. So you really want to see that number lower, and that's more like a number like in the SEC country. Past couple of years, Ole Miss has been flirting at 120% and getting blown out of the stadium. That's what Washington looks like in a run defense as far as our model is concerned. Pass defense 89%. That's a good number. Not elite, but that's a good pass defense number. I think the biggest key, though, when you look at these statistics is kind of trying to grapple with where some of the opponents are and where the averages are. As I said, weirdly to say, red flag with Oregon that they're at 66%. The reason I said that is when you look at what their pass defense has been able to do, it may be almost too low. Like, I don't doubt that Oregon is elite or very, very good. I do doubt that they can sustainably keep teams at 66%. That number is just too darn low. 4.6 yards per attempt is too low. And I say that because even it's the same thing that happens in the NFL. Good passing attacks carry. You see teams like Deshaun Watson throw a lot of yards and a lot of points on a really good Alabama defense in the playoff year after year. You see it with Oklahoma when they played Georgia, when they played Alabama. Really good passing offenses tend to generate high yardage. I think they're benefiting a lot from the fact that, for example, Auburn had 5.5 yards per attempt and average is 7.4, but Auburn feasted on the bad defenses they played and have been a 5 yard per attempt team against, for example, Texas A&M. Texas A&M, by the way, we don't think their secondary is necessarily that elite, but Auburn is that inflated. When you look at the rest of it, Colorado, who 3.9 yards per attempt is a great game, but it also seemed a little uncharacteristic. So across the board, it's hard to say if maybe on one hand Oregon is that good in terms of pass defense, and they may be very, very good. I don't know if they play a high-level passing attack if it's gonna necessarily match up. And on the flip side, when you talk run defense for Washington, I do think the run defense is suspect. I also think it's hurt by the fact that they gave up over 5 yards per carry to a Cal team in the middle of the freaking night. Been way too many of those games. It's hurt by the fact that Arizona, they hold them under 4 yards per carry, but Arizona is averaging a pretty miserable total of just over 5 yards per carry, and it's been held by the way, we filter out FCS, and when you take that into account, they're being actually averaging about 4. So really a lot of Washington's opponents have been either so bad, like BYU, Arizona, that good days in rush defense don't show, or a couple teams like the Cal game, like a win against Southern Cal, are kind of battering their averages more than probably should be the case, even though they're still only allowing 4.2 yards per carry. Overall, 4.5, as I said earlier, when you factor in FBS only. Net result of all of that talk and garbage. Again, we're doing model only, but we're just trying to give you a baseline as far as our model is concerned. Washington's expected to get about 4.2 yards per carry, but only 5.3 yards per attempt, whereas Oregon is expected to get a full 5.3 yards per carry above their season average and 7.5 yards per attempt. 4.5 yards per carry is competent. We consider 7.5 yards per attempt is generally competent, or productive in either case. Oregon is productive on both sides of the ball as far as our model is concerned. Washington is okay running it and not productive at all passing. I think to a certain degree, this is kind of flagging something we've seen from Washington. The passing offense has disappeared against better defenses on a number of occasions. It's saying the same thing's going to happen here. So our model has it 6.5 to about 4.7 yard per play differential, 31-16 score Oregon over Washington. And it really comes down to the fact that Washington's pass offense, as far as our model is concerned, is going up against a high-level passing defense. As I said, I don't know that Oregon is really 66%. That is not to say they're not elite. I'm just saying that 75% is elite and 66% sounds almost unrealistically good. But I do think in this game, given the way that Washington's responded against high-level passing offenses, or passing defenses, I should say, it may be that Eason does struggle in this game quite a bit, and they do hold, again, a team to about 66% of their average. That's why our model has this a 15-point win for Oregon, basically because it thinks, looking at the history for Washington and how good Oregon's been in pass D, that Washington's passing offense will not work. Whereas it does think that Oregon, with the quarterback play they have, with the fact that they've scored on some really good defenses, can put up 30 points in a game. And that deviates quite a bit from the model. I mean, Oregon is only a 2.5-point favorite. Normally, our model is quite close to Vegas when all is said and done. Here it is not. It thinks this game is much more lopsided than Vegas does. Quite frequently when that happens, it means Vegas sees something that we don't see, and that there's something, maybe a particular matchup problem or a particular issue that means that when you look at the baseline for the two teams, it's not really indicative of how the game's going to go. In other words, if we're seeing 15 points in the model and Vegas is saying, nah, this is a 2-point spread, quite frequently that means that Washington would win straight up in this game. I am not giving commentary one way or the other on this, frankly. It is pointedly a model-only video because, as Daniel said, we had a lot of content and I'd want to look at 3 or 4 games worth of tape to get an idea of exactly what it's seeing. Even though, by the way, I have seen multiple full games from both these teams, I'm just not confident enough right now to say exactly what Vegas sees that the model isn't, in terms of why this game should be closer than our model predicts. But regardless, our model does predict this 31-16 Oregon over Washington.